from Production Music Live today with producer notes, and we're taking a look at the style of Ben Böhmer, Father Ocean. Ben Böhmer from Germany is known for his melodic and emotive style that blends the elements of deep house, melodic house, progressive house and melodic techno. And the Father Ocean remix for Monolink is his third most played track and currently sitting in position 5 on his Spotify with 3.6 million listeners. He's released music on labels such as Tontöpferei and later on This Never Happened. I read in an article that he was kind of discovered by Lane 8, who was then living in Leipzig, Germany in 2017, and he's listened to some music of Ben, played it at some shows, and then he asked James Grant from Anjuna Deep, Anjuna Beats to reach out to Ben for demos, which then happened. So Ben then started releasing on Anjuna, and today he's releasing via Ninja Tune. So I've made a bunch of videos in the past on his sound and some with Ben about his live set, making a track from scratch. We also made a masterclass. I will put links into the description, but now we want to take a look at the style of this Father Ocean track, and we have a fully arranged track here lasting around 8 minutes with an intro. With some pads and drones and these zappy, perky things here in the background. Some grain delays on top. And then we have the part where the kick comes in. Top loops and loops. So we're building it up slowly and then more. We are already arriving at the first characteristic element of a sound. In arrangements, he can be quite abrupt from part to part, like here. And in the original track, we have the Monolink vocal playing here and then a piano in the background, and then it starts building back up. The second characteristic element is this reduced drop element. So it's not full on everything playing in the drop, but more like building it back up and bringing the hats and arps back in over time. And working over the next 1 or 2 minutes, working himself towards the actual climax of the song, which then in this case here is around 5 minutes in. So glides and sweeps and drums out, kick out, and then this is the actual climax of the track here. Melodies go a bit higher than they used to be before. This is also quite characteristic. Sometimes the arp moves up an octave here. And by the way, shout out to my friend Uros YT, super talented producer and composer who helped work on this project and push it over the finish line and also create these nice little melody parts here. I'm putting a link to his YouTube channel in the description. Thanks, man. And we are in the full drop here. This is the climax of the track. It's all playing. We have rides playing. We have all these elements playing. We have the arp playing sort of notes higher than anywhere else in the track. And then it sort of falls into the last break. And then we are going into the outro drop so we can mix into the next track. And you can see the arpeggios here heavily automated in the filter to give it this super lively and organic feeling. And so this is the arrangement overview, and let's take a quick look through the different groups. We have kick and tom sort of combined here in that first group. And then the drums group, which is basically serving as our loop here. Sometimes more reduced and sometimes full on. Taking a look at that in a minute, we have this fills part here. Very typical way of transitioning from Ben Böhmer in his tracks. And instruments. Bass, a bunch of pads and drones, and then the main melodic elements like this arp and also this gliding lead sound here. And then we have the effects and ambience group down here. And these are our groups. So that is the overview. And now let's go into the most important elements of this style, of this sound in the back here. I'm going to copy them over one by one. All right, so let's look at the most important elements one by one in the back. So we isolate them and hear them without, and then within the context, kick and tom. And in the second bar. So we have a nice and round kick. It sounds warm, but it's also short. And below that, we are using a kick sound as a tom. And we are making sure it's sidechained to the kick so we don't interfere too much. And it's in the second bar in these positions. And then below that, we are playing a sustained, nice, moogy bass sound. And we are also using Ableton wavetable here. And we have this nice sustained saw wave here, then sending it through a filter, making sure it's set to mono, and we glide 280 milliseconds. So we are using Ableton stock effects and instruments plus Serum, and it kind of makes sense to sometimes limit yourself to really learn your tools. And if I want to quote Austin Kleon from Steel Like an Artist, nothing's more paralyzing than the idea of limitless possibilities, and also it seems contradictory, but when it comes to creative work, limitations mean freedom. That's why in these walkthroughs here, we are trying to keep it within the limits of Ableton and maybe one third-party tool. And I really recommend trying it out and avoiding shiny new object syndrome with synths and plugins, and really learn the tools of your DAW. That can help, and you can achieve a lot of cool sounds like this moog-ish bass sound here. We can also get that going in Ableton with wavetable, some erosion on top, and then using an auto filter with the OSR algorithm and adding in the drive for a bit more grit. So we have this nice glidey feeling in our bass sound, and later also in the leads, very typical for Ben Böhmer's style. And he likes going an octave up at the end of the pattern and then bringing it back. Okay, so the next element that's super crucial for the style would be some kind of pad sound that's quite deep. So I'm going to sort of copy over this section here and we can listen in. It kind of sounds like a small group of horns playing in the morning in the background here. And filtered that way, they remain nicely in the background and feel quite organic. And that's one element of Ben's track. It's always like these organic instrumentations. He's using strings and pianos. And as an old trumpet player, he's often using this upper gliding voice element on top as well. So let's quickly add that in to see what I'm talking about here. This one, which is also this gliding lead remaining on top of everything else. Hear that he used to play a brass instrument. This always is a recurring theme in his tracks. And let's quickly add in the arpeggio here as well. Already there with the feels, and this does not really sound like Serum, but it's such a nice sound and we made it work with Serum. I think Ben usually uses Diva for these types of sounds, but we wanted to limit ourselves here to a minimum setup. So let's take a look at what's happening in Serum. We have the sample and hold noise one here in the noise section, and then we just have the basic, the more rounded saw wave. Goes from a saw wave to a sine wave in a way, the basic mini one, which is sounding a lot softer than the actual init saw wave from Serum. And then very simple setup here. Envelope 2 controlling the filter, MG low pass 24, envelope 1 controlling the amplifier, and then we are sending it through distortion with tape saturation here. Bit of delay, bit of reverb, long size here of the reverb. Decay time is set to 5 seconds, and equalizer rolling off some low end and some mid frequencies, and then we are sort of automating the cutoff of the arpeggio, which is playing these notes. And this is nice and stable, and that works because we don't have too many chords in our chord progression. Then you can keep this low note here and it never really sounds weird. That's one of the rules of thumb that I kind of like using, because if you're playing a lot of different chords, this is getting a lot more tricky. But here you can see the E, which is E major in this case, is resting quite steadily, and so the arpeggio can also use that one as a resting note, just like it can use the A as a resting note here as well. So let's quickly take a look at the chord progression we are working with in this horn. So we have F minor or F sharp minor here. If I'm bringing this up an octave, it's easier to see. A down an octave. So here's our F sharp minor chord, and then we have it copied over one more time, but it's voiced differently. The third is up and that F is down an octave here. So super nice feeling there. And then we are going into A major. Bring this up an octave quickly. It's actually A and the fifth in this case. We are not really playing the third. The third would be C sharp, which is not playing in this case. So we're not playing the third, it's A5 in a sense. And then we are going over to E major, where we have E, the major third in between, then G sharp, and then a minor third in between, and then we're playing B. So root, third, and fifth. Okay, so F sharp minor, and then followed by A major, playing A fifth here, and then going down to the fourth to introduce E major in the third chord. And you could also argue that this could be played as a 2-chord track where you're just playing these 2 chords here. So you would take this down or take this out, move this down, move this up, and you would just go A5 and then E major. And go back and forth. And Ben, in his style, he uses this a lot. He has a lot of these tracks that are 2-chord tracks, and they allow for so much jamming on top, because then you have the entire scale to play around with over these 2 chords. You have a lot of possibilities. If you play more chords, every chord you introduce into your chord progression somehow makes it more difficult to play stable melodies on top. So that is a key takeaway, in my opinion, from his style. Something to keep in mind. And then another thing, in the second round, we can see it's getting more interesting because the third chord is not playing the third, but we are actually going up to the 9th up here to F sharp, and we are getting, instead of, we're getting, and the typical one would be for Ben to go up here. But in this case, in this recomposition, we went down back. So we went. But still a nice lead back into the beginning here. So that's how you have a 3-chord track, but you have 2 rounds. And one time you're playing the third, and one time you're playing the 9th up here instead of the third. And then it keeps staying interesting. This really opens up the song here, and it combines with these slow attacks, which makes it all sound much more organic here, and also the glides that are going on in our bass and also in these other elements that we are playing on top. So these are really the key elements here to get right for this sound. And let's actually take a quick look what it's doing together with the glide on top here, analyzing the MIDI. So this is our glide here. C sharp is our glide, and you can see it sort of completes our chord. We had these notes playing, and then we are playing C on top again. So this completes our F sharp minor chord here with C, and then it goes down and plays the upper note of the E major chord behind that, while in between the C sharp was also playing the third of our A major chord here. So that's how it all blends together and makes sense. This one works nicely because these two create tension in our track. So E and D sharp nicely work here. and we can sort of do that again. We already did it here, and we can do that again with different elements, because here it's being once played with the horns in the chords, and then it's also being played with this leady glide. And so they're sitting right next to one another and biting a bit, but creating this tension and then releasing it back here. So towards the end of the pattern of the 8 bars, we're creating the tension and we're releasing it again when going back to the first chord. And then we are adding this arpeggio here on top, which feels super organic through these nice filter automations. Yeah, and we also have a version with the original Melodies and Harmonies, like a full-on remake. Let's quickly take a look at how it sounds there and then come back to this one here. Yeah, I quickly went back to Ableton 10 where I have this one loaded up and we can listen in how it works here. And here we are going from G and it's a 2-chord track in this case, and then you can build up on top of that. Lots of degrees of freedom here, always switching back and forth between these 2 bass notes, G and D, and then back up here with a glide. That's how it's done in the original. In the climax part here, we're going up octaves. So super nice setup. If you can manage to put together a 2-chord track, that's always a lot of fun in my opinion. So super strong melodic and vibey elements in that original remix by Ben Böhmer. That's what Paavo Siljamaki from Anjuna Deep and Anjuna Beats called. Ben is capable of writing that beautiful line or note between happy and sad that we all love so much. I can't remember the show it was in, but I heard it once. And it's basically that tension between euphoria and nostalgia, and he's really good at that. And these 2-chord tracks kind of help you build that. Going back to the one we were working on. Often in there, we will also find this 1-note pluck that sort of gives a bit of a rhythm to the sound. So these mono plucks, let's quickly copy over one of those and add it in here, but it needs to be in the correct position. So more like this. You can find that in many of his tracks. It's very characteristic, especially in the earlier ones. Just a short and snappy sine wave. And then playing 16th notes with it. And then never forget the organic elements. There's always lots of organic elements in his music, like a piano in the background that adds this natural feel. And that one is in there for the vibe. To make sure, because you could play this faster if you don't have these organic elements. If you have more electronic elements, this can easily be trance music. And let's actually take a look at that in a quick detour. Let's say we are taking Ben's remix of Father Ocean with the chord progressions and everything and handing it over to an old trance legend like the Thrill Seekers. What would they do with it? They would go faster. And then maybe build it up like this. own elements like that typical Thrill Seekers lead maybe. And then they would bring in some of these trance plucks like this one. And then it would sound like this. And I would just use the vocal in the transition parts. That's, by the way, something that Ben usually does as well. He uses that vocal towards the end and to introduce the new roundabout, and not so much using it all over the place. You have that in the Space in Between remix, you have that in the Monolink remix. So going back to the other project. Okay, so let's keep going. Let's add in some drum elements like shakers and rides and stuff. I'm copying over a ride element. Serving as an offbeat hi-hat with some vinyl distortion on top, and then moving it around your ear. Something ran pan or random panning is something he likes using as well. And then we have a bunch of faster hi-hat elements here. Almost working like a shaker, but 16th notes. And this particular track combines these sounds with those perky zap things here that we took a look at in the beginning, where you have these sounds and that one. So what are we actually doing here with Serum? Let's quickly take a look. We're using this bottle blow thing. And then this LFO is moving a bandpass filter around. So we have a bit of movement in that sound. And you can also see that down here in the frequencies. So this feels super organic. Also auto panned left and right, a lot of that going on. And if we quickly zoom into this Percs app here and set it to transpose, we can see we have it automated. The transposition goes up and down. And so if we play around with that, high up, and low down. And so that's keeping it interesting, super interesting element here that's later then going through a grain delay and also through the auto pan again to have these, to have it move around your ears. So super nice technique to get closer to these weird glitchy elements. And I've talked to Ben about it in the masterclass, and he kind of likes to sort of resample his own projects when starting a new track, and that's sometimes when he comes up with these elements. This could happen when you pitch something down an octave or higher an octave, but sometimes he's also using an Atmo or drone loop to start a new track from. And he also told me he usually starts in an existing project file of an existing track and then removes elements as he's writing the new track in there. So this is kind of like, this can be a series of tracks in tracks that date back to some earlier work of him, and you can still hear some of these sounds in your projects. And if we take a quick look at this next hi-hat element here in an offbeat position, that one has an automation on the decay time. So it's always playing in the third position here, but this is automated, and thereby we are getting a bit more organic movement into the sound. So it's more natural, and that way you can also combine it with playing around with the velocities. Here in this case, we have a short and snappy clap sound, or two clap sounds layered together in this case. This one quite subtle. This one a bit more clear and combined. Super short, They don't really have so much emphasis. They're just here for the right feeling because these other hi-hat elements are mixed much louder than these claps. Basically, in his older tracks, you can find a lot of these more snappy claps. And then at some point when he was playing more live, he used those more longer layered ones with long reverb tails because they also fit well into a live performance. And then some shaker type stuff. Here we are using recorded white noise and tweaking it with a long attack and fade in this case, so it sounds like a shaker and it also plays 16th notes. And velocities are moved around. And it could actually also be sidechained. And now. And yeah, in the claps, I forgot to mention that we are using some samples directly from the Ben Böhmer pack. By the way, this project file is part of the Ben Böhmer style Melodic Sound Pack we have on PML with a bunch of other project files in the style of his tracks and MIDI files and a sample pack with, you know, one-shots and loops and perc loops and hat loops. These kind of things in there. So I'm putting a link in the description to that one, also to the masterclass with Ben Böhmer. And here we have a nice element as well. I'm copying that one over. Something that sounds like a ride is layered with a ride and with some noise, white noise from analog. If I'm only listening to the white noise. So we're taking the noise section, deactivating everything else in Ableton, adding some randomness to the velocity with this random MIDI effect before generating the sound. And then we are making sure that this sound has a very short decay time in the amplifier section here, and sustain is very low down, so it's short and snappy, and it's playing 16th notes as well. And we're sending it around your ears with the auto pan. Okay, I'm skipping some of the other drum elements. It's more of the usual stuff. And I'm quickly taking a look at this fill effect here, which is a clap and a clap fill with a long reverb tail. What is going on here? We have basically 3 notes. And we are layering a bunch of sounds because we don't have the absolute original sample at our fingertips. That's why we're layering a bunch of sounds together to make them sound like the original one. This is also an explanation why we have a bunch of pads in our pad group here. Usually you're not necessarily needing to use that many pads, but when reverse engineering something, sometimes with you know, household elements, you need the layer of that, a layer of that, and then you get to the final sound. Then later you can group them together into one sound or even bounce them out as audio as you wish. But you have this treasure trove of single cool elements in here in this project file that you can use however you want. So here we even had like a bunch of claps layered together in different positions here to make them sound more interesting, and then we're sending them through a long reverb with almost 10 seconds decay time and through an echo with ping pong applied. So very typical effect for his style of music. And speaking of remaking, I read a couple of times in comments things like, why would I want to sound exactly like artist XYZ? In my mind, this is missing the point. By reverse engineering your favorite pieces, you start to develop the thinking of the original artist. And so you learn the rules first so you can break them later. You start copying what you love, and at the end of the copy you will find yourself or your own sound. So you don't just steal the style, you steal the thinking behind the style, because you don't want to look like your heroes, you want to see through the eyes of your heroes. And that again is a quote from Austin Kleon's Steal Like an Artist. I'm putting a link to that book in the description as well. And Ben is also influenced by a variety of genres, including classical music, indie and pop, and he has this diverse, eclectic sonic palette. He's even telling us in his public playlist Ben Böhmer influences, where you have Kalkbrenner, you have Guy Burato, you have M83, Max Cooper, and Nathan Fake, and so on. And when people call something original, 9 out of 10 times they just don't know the references or the original sources involved. That's also a direct quote from the book from Austin Kleon. And what a good artist understands is nothing comes from nowhere. All creative work builds on what came before. Nothing is completely original. So it's great we can get influence from those that came before and sort of try to shape our own sound with these different influences. Okay, so let's take an overview over the arrangement. As mentioned before, Ben is not shying away from sort of abrupt endings and bringing the dynamic completely down. So we are starting with very relaxed Atmo, dreamy vibes. This could be an intro track to a set, and then we are bringing in some more elements. And then only after a minute the kick kicks in. And very typical, almost never starting with hi-hats, but bringing in everything step by step. Hi-hats and then rides and more elements here that seem more climactic. Parts where everything is playing together are usually not too long, because then they're usually followed by a part that's letting room for just one element at times. In this case here in the original, the vocal. And then after a build-up, we usually see here pretty late in the track actually, but you could also argue that for a DJ this track starts here after a minute. So the break is after 1.5 minutes, and at 2.5 minutes you have your reduced drop, which is very typical for him, where he's building it back up. And then over the next 1.5 minutes building towards the climax part. High bass introducing the next section. Everything is fluid, going, gliding, you know, like an organic mass. Sometimes working with delayed elements here in the break, you can see we are not directly starting, we are actually stopping for 2 bars. Forgot to mention that, and then building up. And there's always drones and textures in the background, like this pad drone here. And some Atmo sound. And some Foley. And some other ambient stuff. And the zappy, perky things. Something glitchy, something that sounds organic and glitchy. And then again, back to the climax here, and then a second break, cooling everything back down. And usually you have lots of automations, lots of parts that were recorded with a MIDI piano or something in the background. So he's really taking his time to produce these tracks in order to deliver something truly remarkable. You have lots of iterations. So these tracks don't happen in like 3-4 hours. They happen over the course of several weeks. And when I had the chance to speak to him, he told me he often tweaks the track or mix over and over, and then even trying different mixing approaches with an engineer, sometimes himself, sometimes then looking for another engineer who maybe has a different approach to mixing. And that reminded me of something I read in the book Rick Rubin in the Studio, where they're saying his goal is to produce in the most basic and purest form, no extra bells and whistles. And he's saying, my first record actually says reduced by Rick Rubin. Okay, so before we have a full playback of the track, a key elements summary here. We have the kicks and toms in this style. Then combined with a sustained bass that's moog-ish, glidey. Gliding saw wave that's warm in processing. And then these pads, dreamy, long attack time pads in the background. Simple chords, stable chords that allow you to play a lot of melodic elements and climactic higher octaves on top, without having too many changes in there. Always these groovy mono plucks. And then some pianos for the organic feel or some other organic instrument. The kick foundation is always super round and warm. Bring the piano back down a bit, just put it to the foreground so we hear it a bit better. And then you have these gliding elements from the former trumpet player. This is the filter frequency here. Overlaps to glide around. And then the main melodic element that really gets the stage here. It's mixed louder than the other elements, so it really nicely cuts through, and it has this nice noise section on top that makes it sound more natural. You have the same pattern, but you also have room for variation. And it feels very organic that way. It almost sounds like Diva here. It's super nice, super nicely done. Our friend, I mentioned in the beginning of the video, Uros did a great job putting together the sound here. And then usually Ben Böhmer is also using vocal shots, like the Monolink one here at the beginning of the pattern and towards the end of the pattern with like reverb tails. And in the drums, they are rather natural sounding, organic ones, a lot of ride elements always. With a glassy, metallic kind of noise on top that cuts nicely through the mix without having too many high frequencies. And then he's really sending the stuff around your ears usually with auto pan or ran pan. is also using this dizziness preset here from the auto pan. Which one? This one. It looks a bit more crazy. You know, sometimes that one helps when you try to achieve this type of sound, and then just fast hi-hats serving as shaker elements. And in this more, a bit older style, those short and snappy claps. And then not to forget these perky, glitchy things here. Yeah, so this is the style. Feel free to check out the links in the description for the Ben Böhmer Sound Pack, for the Melodic House Academy, for the Ben Böhmer Masterclass. By getting the Ben Böhmer Pack or Masterclass, by the way, you're supporting the artist as well. And I'm going to cover his sound in the future again. It's just such a great sound. So feel free to let me know in the comments what you'd like to see next. And now let's have a full playback.